All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's good to see you all. We appreciate you taking some time to jump on a session, a webinar to learn about this topic. If we're lucky, we all get to retire someday, and that's the goal for a lot of people. And in the meantime, we do as much good as we can for our students and our classes. But getting to retirement is a journey, and it's as I look across the screens on this space, we have Aaron, who's a second-year teacher. That's joining in, and we have Dave, who's going to retire in May, and so we got people across the spectrum. But regardless, in talking with Steve Schmidt, who retired 2 years ago from Osceola, there can be some bumps in the road, and the goal of today's get together is really to identify and hear from Steve and his story of what things have happened, and we hope that between him and Jason that we can learn maybe how to navigate that a little bit better, to have a little bit smoother transition into that point and maximize the financial benefit that you all would have as a retired teacher from the NPERS system. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Steve Schmidt, again, retired teacher from Osceola, and then also Jason Hayes, who is an attorney that works for the Nebraska State Education Association. I got that right, Jason?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. So I will turn it over to both of you.
Jason, you have anything you want to start out with?
Well, I just say that my official title is Director of Government Relations at NSCA, and so maybe I've met some of you on other calls or in different forums. So it's nice to be here today and to kind of go through what some of the hurdles that Steve faced last year. So thank you very much.
Okay. I'd like to start by thanking Matt. As usual, he's on top of things, knows how to put these things together. And yesterday I asked him a question. He said, "Oh, I think you can do this or that." And, that's usually me back last minute. But I was trying to explain to my wife who Matt Kreifels was, and I just didn't have enough adjectives, good adjectives. So I also want
Steve, I might have you explain that to my wife too. I'm not sure she knows. So. Thank you, though.
You bet. And also I want to give a slap on the back to Jason Hayes, and you'll hear a little more about him later. But this is twice in my career that NSCA has had my back. Once was with a RIF, and this time, and I can just tell you that it's worth it to be part of the organization. I want to make it clear from the outset that my idea today is it's not NPERS bashing. And if you don't know what NPERS is, that's stands for Nebraska Public Employees Retirement System. Everybody that I've worked with down there has been professional, been courteous, been cordial. Except for this one tiny little thing. We always got along. And they had an appeal process. I went through it, and the appeal process happened to work for me. And but as I went through it, I thought, how many other teachers are faced with this? And in the email that I got sent out on listserv, I got some replies back. And other people have other issues. And so I'll try to go through that as quickly as possible. I am sorry that I don't have a really fancy display for you today, because this is pretty much what you're facing if you have to go through an appeal. It's a lot of paperwork, and it's a lot of emailing, not a lot of phone calls, because you want records of things. And so, it's not going to be fancy, but I would like to ask you, if you have a question, please hold off on it. I'm pretty old and I'll lose my train of thought. If you feel like you absolutely need to have it answered right away, go ahead and yell. So I spent from October 2020 to April 2021 getting this sorted out. And that's behind me. It's done. And the purpose of me talking to you today is I'd like to keep other teachers from going through this. I'd like to keep the agency from going through this. if it's possible. Those 5 months I spent first understanding what the problem was. I retired. Checks should be coming, shouldn't be a big deal. And it wasn't quite that smooth. I had to understand what the problem was. Then I had to put back my facts, put my reply back. I had to learn what the system was. And believe me, if you ask infers, what's the appeals, they are going to tell you, okay, it's this link here. And then later on, during the appeal process, they're going to say, I notified you, I told you what the appeal process was. It's a link to a set of regulations. There's 12 pages of regulations. And so it's up to you to sort it out. The way I saw it, I had 4 levels of appeal. And I might be wrong, but I had 4 levels of appeal through the NPER system. So I'm going to try to summarize what I did and not go through everything point by point. Let's talk about the retirement plan, the short version of it. So the teacher's retirement plan is administered by NPERS. It's the only defined benefit plan that they administer. I think that's correct. Jason can jump on me if it's not.
They also administer the state patrol and the judges defined benefit plans, but
They have defined benefit plans?
yes.
Okay, but it's not teachers not a defined contribution. And so
No, you're right. The teachers is a defined benefit plan. So yeah, there's the school judges and state patrol is a defined benefit plan, and then the state and county has a hybrid pension plan. But usually when you talk about pension plans and defined benefit, the teachers, the school employees plan is the largest in the state, and so you're in the ballpark, Steve.
Okay, good. So what I'm trying to say, you have a generous plan. And my sister down in Arizona would just hate to hear me talk about that, but it's a good thing. If there's one thing that's good about teaching, is the retirement plan that's in place. So it was told to me one time, I think at an NPERS seminar, is if you want a short version of what your benefit plan is worth, take 2% of your salary for every year of service that you have with the system. So you're going to get 2% of your salary back. If you teach for 50 years, you're going to get 100% of your salary. That's real rough, but that's good enough. And there's a lot of other things that go into it. Personally, I think if you can live on a teacher's salary, you can retire on a teacher's salary and use it, or I see that coming up pretty soon. And Jeremy or Brandy can vouch for that, I think. In my case, I only have 22 years of service in this system. So my check's about 44% of what I took home. Now I'll give a short description of what my situation was at Osceola. I had a contract for the last 15 years with Osceola, the last 15 years of my teaching. And it was a standard teacher's contract with 10 extra duty days, extra contract days, not extra duty days. I also got FFA pay, and that was run through the extra duty assignments. My FFA pay was somewhere between a head coach and an assistant coach. I didn't have any stipulation as to what I was supposed to do with those contract days or what my FFA duties were. And I questioned the bookkeeper about this once. She says, that's because we don't have to tell you what to do. We don't have to tell you to work. Some people have to be told to work. She said, you always do more than you have to. Okay, now what happened when I retired? There are several steps to the retirement process. I encourage you to go to the in-person seminars. I think you could start at age 50 going to those. And they're good. And you can ask questions. You can get take your wife or your significant other and kind of get some things figured out. Bring back a binder like this. It doesn't have all the answers, but it's useful. And trouble is, starting at 50 sometimes can be too late. So I think younger teachers ought to have access to this, ought to learn about it. And even if whatever age you are, I think you need to talk to other teachers. In my case, there were several of us that were retiring in a short window at Osceola. So there was a lot of chatter back and forth, but it wasn't like we spent a lot of time studying it. A really important step in retirement is the pre-retirement interview. And I chose to do mine down at the office in Lincoln. So in July 2019, Diane and I went down to Lincoln. We scheduled a visit with the Social Security office and then with the NPERS office. And we went through that process. And at that time, I was told, do everything correctly, do everything on time, and you get your check in a reasonable amount of time. If you miss some of these steps, you're going to probably miss some money. So I know that there's a teacher that got their paperwork in towards the end of June, even though they retired in May. They got no retirement for June, and they never will. So, I tried to stay on the leading edge of all the deadlines. If I could send something in 90 days ahead of time, boy, day 91, I was sending it in. Or day 89, I was sending it in. Anyway, in this interview, the lady said, okay, now you're not going to get a check right away. What's going to happen is you'll get your first check probably in October. But it'll have all your previous months of retirement in that check. So you get your money back. So I thought, well, Diane's still working. We've got savings. I actually will get a payroll check from school until August 15th. I don't know how many schools are like that, but at Osceola, your salary is prorated through the entire year. So, we thought we could do that. So I went home and I wrote my letter. And the problem came up as to what was the effective date of retirement. I didn't think too much about it. I went through all the systems, the things that I had to do, got my paperwork turned in on time. And October rolled around. I thought, okay, start seeing that check pretty soon. And I got a check. So here we go. I opened it up. It was for 1 month's of benefit. I go, this is not right. So I called the office right away. And they said, well, you're going to get a letter on it to explain everything. I said, okay. About 2 weeks later, I got another check from NPERS, another 1 month of benefit. Okay, now wait a minute. So I called them again. The letter is coming. All right, fine. Well, November 6th, I finally received the letter. And in that letter, they told me that based on my work record, which included extra duty logs that I sent in, they had determined that I was a year-round employee. And if you're a year-round employee, you cannot retire before the end of your normal year. The end of my normal year would have been August 31st. I couldn't retire before August 31st. Therefore, my effective retirement date was September 1st. And I was not going to get the retirement for the month of the summer of 2020. Now, I had decided we couldn't get into the school because of COVID between March 17th and May 27th. And because I only had roughly $2,000 coming, I thought I can give that up and I'll spend that month of June working in school, getting things ready because a lot of stuff needed to be cleaned up and getting things ready for this new teacher. And we bought a farm and trying to get just a lot of work. And the budget was, they went from a really predictable system to something online and it was blowing up. So I put in 158 hours in the month of June 2020. So of course, this goes back in with my extra duty logs as my last extra duty retirement, or my last extra duty report. Sorry, I gotta get out of my notes here. I had never heard anything at any time that the extra duty logs could be used to figure your employment status. I didn't hear it from my school. I certainly never heard it at an NPERS seminar. And certainly our bookkeeper didn't know it because each fall she would go through one of the in-services and she said, don't forget your extra duty logs. And we'd say, what do you have to put on an extra duty? And so she said, if you're correcting papers at home, you can put on an extra duty log. Well, how many of us do that stuff? Do tons of work. Many times I'd be sitting up till 10 o'clock at night working on papers. So, and she said, we said, what do they need it for? She said, oh, I don't know. The retirement needs it for something. She said, I think it's more for the salary of the hourly staff. Anyway, that's how it went. So that started in 2012. And Jason can talk on that some more if he wants to. When I got this letter, I vehemently disagreed with the lady. I said, there is no way. There's no way that that can be right. I donated that time to my school. How can it be required of me now to work until August 31st, 2020? I always donated more time than I had to. So you're telling me that you're going to cut my retirement because I worked harder than I had to. And she said, well, I'll talk to Julie, because Julie's name was on the form. I'll talk to Julie and I'll get back to you. And she called back yet that day. And she said, I've talked to 3 or 4 people and they all agree that September 1st is your effective retirement date. And I said, well, that can't be right. She said, well, if you want to, you can write a letter to our attorney. I said, well, who's that? And she told me the name. And I said, where do I send it to? She said, well, send it to him here at the building. And that was it. Our conversation was over. So I immediately called Kenny Malone. I was out working on a shed, tearing a shed down, just all hyper about this. I called Kenny Malone because he retired June 18th, a little bit before me. My last day of service was June 30th. And I said, I texted him, and he didn't do text at the moment. So he called me back and he said, what's going on? And I told him, and I said, do you have any trouble with your checks? No, he said, no trouble at all. I said, what about your extra duty logs? He says, I don't think we had any trouble with extra duty logs. And he says, the problem is in how your school reported it. In very friendly, like manner, he says, you're screwed, my friend. So I called Rich Douglas, was my next call. Maybe not that day, but I got a hold of Rich because I thought somebody help me out here. And he told me that Rick Crozier was the last person who had an issue with NPERS, as far as he knew, among the ag teachers. He gave me contact information for Rick. I called Rick and talked to him for a while. He kind of agreed with Kenny. He says, you're screwed. But he said, first thing Monday morning, call NSEA. He says, I don't know what they can do, but he says, call NSEA. So this apparently was on a weekend. I called NSA on a Monday morning. I didn't talk to Jason right away, talked to somebody up front. And within an hour, I had a man named Jason Hayes calling me back. I found out that he had some experience with NPERS, and that got us right into the situation. You want to say something, Jason?
Sounds like I was the only person that told you you weren't screwed.
Oh,
or at least not right away.
That's right. That's right. So I guess I want to take my phone and kind of go over to some of the exhibits. In this process, you become your own attorney, unless you choose to hire one. You become your own attorney and you have to handle all the legal things. Jason was invaluable here. I would run something by him. I'd type a letter up and I'd write it, what do you think? And he'd take some heated words, language out of it and said, you probably don't need to do that. And then he says, you don't have to send things certified, it'll get there. But it was a real process. I'm going to run over to the first letter and hope you can hear me.
Steve, when you hold your phone, hold it actually sideways, like landscape, and we'll be able to see. It'll be bigger for us. Yep, there we go.
This changed since I set it up. You've got some.
And if you didn't notice, that he's on a different screen, so put it in gallery view if you want, and you'll be able to see this better.
So,
Steve, we're not picking you up on the microphone. You might need to move the paper closer to your computer and do that.
sorry. We'll do
No
that.
problem.
All right. How's this? Better?
Yep, that looks good. Thank you.
The main point on it is, can you guys read this? Yes or no? The main
If
point
it's too small for you, you might have to, everyone, you might need to pin, like click on that small window and then pin it, and then it will get big for you, by the way, as a Zoom trick. But go ahead, Steve.
The main thing is it tells me this is the first time I realized what the deal was. They had decided that I was a full-time employee.
Okay. Hey, Steve, I have your original letter, and I could actually show it on my screen so you could talk.
Okay.
Would you like to do that?
Yeah, great.
That sounds better. You're coming in and out, Steve, on your voice being that far away from the computer. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yep.
You see, there's a lot of, this letter's been handled quite a bit. And so I tried to make some notes on it so that people would understand when it was sent, when it would get. Here's a, when you go into the system, things don't all happen right away. And you get a letter and you compose a reply to that letter. And of course, it takes a while for that information to go back and forth. And they're decent about getting things back to you in decent time. It all takes time. And if you go from this letter until the time that I get my next reply, after I get done with this, I talk to these people and I go to talk to the, I don't want to say the man's name, but the legal counsel at Emperor's, and he gets a letter back to me. It's the end of November already. My next choice is to appeal to his boss, who's the director. So I do the same thing, slightly changing my plea because I see some things that need to be answered in the legal counsel's reply. And now it's the end of December before I get the legal counsel's reply back saying basically no. The director's reply back saying no. So then I applied for a hearing. And to get a little ticklish here, I'm going to ask you to give me the screen back so I can show you something on the hearing document.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to take this hearing document. And it came to me in that kind of format. And rather than filling out, because my handwriting is terrible, rather than filling it out, I tried to reproduce it on my own computer. And I did, but what I forgot, what I left out was there was a spot where I could request a formal hearing or an informal hearing. And the difference between those two was money. And as I talked back and forth with Jason, he said, well, if you just want to talk to the board and let them know what's going on, informal hearing is the way to go. For a while, because I didn't have this form filled out correctly, I suppose the Emperors had to default to a formal hearing. So for a while, I had a formal hearing scheduled. I'd already spending more money. Any points you want to make out there, Jason?
No, I think, I mean, I think at this point, when you, well, just a couple of things. I should also mention that my background is that I was the legal counsel at Emperors for a period of years. I was also the legal counsel to the retirement committee for the Nebraska legislature for a number of years. I've been at the AG's office for a number of years, the Attorney General's office for Nebraska, and then also at the Treasurer's office, where I was involved with the investment council for a few years. So I've kind of gotten a whole kind of gambit of being involved in areas of this legislative policy as well as agency policy. So wanted to say, Steve, is that just to kind of go back over what you mentioned, you had a problem with MPERS. You had an issue in terms of how they were interpreting law, in terms of how they calculated your retirement benefit. You asked for a determination by the director as to what your actual benefit should be. And then when you got, when the director got back to you and basically said that what you previously received is correct, and you still didn't feel like you had your grievance addressed, then you were able to appeal the decision of the director, and you appealed that to the Public Employees Retirement Board, which oversees the director. So it's kind of a judicial review where you can ask for some relief. The odd thing is it's the agency itself. It's the governing board of the agency. So everything's been being done within the agency. You're not going to a separate judicial court to review the agency. This is a process that any state agency or most state agencies have whenever you disagree with a decision of the agency director. So that just kind of recaps what you just said, Steve.
Right. And I'm not sure when I requested the hearing, finally got that all straightened out. I have to go back and look at that for sure. But one was not available until April. So, it was a stretch. And again, you're acting as your own attorney here, and things have really gotten legal now. And things have to be done correctly. They have to be done on time. You can't email these papers back and forth. They have to be delivered in person or through the postal system. You've got to allow for postal delays. My last set of papers, we went to Arizona for our grandson's 4th birthday, and we're planning on staying down there for a month. We couldn't. I had to be back for this hearing. So the first day that I was down there, I spent that day organizing my exhibits and getting those copies for each member of the board and sending those back by priority mail. And when that was done, then my wife says, okay, now can we spend some time with the family? I said, yeah, we can do that. My exhibits, there were 7 exhibits, and a lot of them were also provided by the agency, but I had a different take on some of them. My exhibits were held together with this. You guys know what that is? Okay, so you're going to see why I bring that up a little bit. It took a while to get those together, but Jason, you correct me on this or not. If you apply for a hearing, do you have to get a hearing, or can it be declined? Do they have to give you a hearing?
They have to give you a hearing.
Okay, well, I thought they didn't have to.
I'm just going to preface this by saying I'm 95% sure on everything I'm saying, but yes, I'm pretty sure that if you request a hearing, that they have to give it. They can't deny it. There's never a situation where you are appealing the decision of the director and they say, well, we're just not going to hear your appeal.
Okay.
And the nice thing about the PERB board is that, there are teacher members of the PERB board. The PERB board is designed to be organized by representatives of each one of the defined benefit and defined contribution plans. So these individuals are pension holders just like you, but they're trying to follow state law and be good trustees of the board or of the plan.
And I don't want to lose my place again, but so Jason and I had talked about this, and if I wasn't satisfied with my results at the hearing, I could go further. I could go to a district court. Again, we're talking more money. And if the finding goes against your district court, you're not only paying your attorney's costs, you're paying court costs. I don't know what all, but as I told the director, I've spent enough money on this already. That was not my purpose. So Diane and I went down to the hearing April 16th, and COVID procedures were in place. So I first met the attorney for the first time. So we bumped elbows and everybody had masks on and stuff. And the hearing room was set up probably, I don't know, 30, maybe 25 by 30-foot room, a fairly large room, so we could be scattered around. And it was set up, I would say courtroom style, because we had the hearing officer from outside the agency off on the other side of the room. And then there was a recorder. They were opposite of us. On our side of the room, there was a table for myself and Diane. And then there was also a table for the legal counsel. To the left of him was a place for witnesses to come in. And clear to the right, there was another table, and we had a young man who'd never witnessed a hearing and wanted to know if he could witness a hearing. I said, yeah, me too. Come on in. So he just wanted to see what was going on. But he had to ask my permission apparently to be there. So I thought it was pretty straightforward. We had the exhibits, and I showed you kind of the exhibits that I had. And they're scattered around the table here, and this is what the agency brought to the table. About 1.25 inches. And I don't know if I was expected to bring my own attorney or what. Well, they had 2 of these ready for us. And so Diane got her own copy.
You can see that their binder is considerably larger than your binder, Steve.
Yeah. Yeah, it had a bigger paperclip by far. It's about this big, this thick. So that's the resources of the agency that you're up against. And to be fair, of that 1.25 inches, about 1/4 inch was my extra duty log. So I'm not going to get into the things that we argued about or put back and forth. That's for another place. The point was, I thought the hearing was very fair. The hearing officer was impartial. He asked good questions, detailed questions of both sides. And when Diane and I left, we felt, I kind of felt like I should have said this, I should have said that. She said, no, you did okay. Or this was answered. But we both felt like the hearing officer was fair. And I think that's a very important point to bring out. The whole process did work. Even if it had gone the other way, I think you can say that it did work. At this point, I don't know where we're at. I got a letter. And so our hearing was April 16th. And at the end of the hearing, the officer said, okay, I'll present my recommendations to the board as soon as I can. And I cannot tell you how soon they'll make a decision, but they'll get back to you as soon as they can. So that was April 16th. About May 20th, I got a letter. And the letter said, pursuant to the recommendations given to us by the hearing officer, we decided to follow the recommendations. I go, okay. So I turn the page and here's the recommendation. The recommendation says basically the same thing. They didn't tell me what they decided. So I emailed the director right away. By this time, we're on a first name basis, not exactly, but we could email each other really well. And he said, oh, I'm sorry. He says, I thought you possibly would have gotten results of that. Said, the hearing officer sided with your argument that the retirement effective date should be July 1st. The PERB voted to accept this decision. Jason, you have anything you want to say about that?
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, I was certainly pleased to see that they went your direction. There's many different ways they could have chosen to go, and I may go, like, when you're done talking, Steve, I may go through some of the legal aspects of it.
Right. So shortly afterwards, I got a check for $1,000. Now here's the thing. So I many times could have just walked away from it. Diane and I could have survived. And I certainly wasn't going to spend any more on it. But the question was, do I keep doing this or just let it go? Well, if I had not given up that month of retirement to help my school, Now I'm talking about, I lost $6,000. And I'll be 69 this year. So most teachers of my vintage probably have 40 years or better in the system. Now you're talking a $12,000 check that you're leaving on the table. And I talked to Rick Crozier about this, and I'm not going to tell you the details of his situation, but he had even a larger amount that was at risk. And they did decide in his favor at that time too. So it can go either way. It's important that you follow the rules, you listen to people, you dot your I's and cross your T's. But I really don't know what the hearing officer said. And I can go into more detail on my actual argument, but it doesn't pertain to you. My concern for you all is if you are doing something in the summer, are you reporting it? Are you getting paid for it? Is it going to hurt you coming down the road to retirement? I mentioned this to Annalise at Ashland. She said, I've got 10 years. I said, you work in the summer? She said, sure. I said, you report it? Sure. I said, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen after this. I don't know what my particular case changed their idea on this. Jason and I kind of visited one time about going back to the legislature. Some statutes were changed in 2012, I believe, that allowed them to make some determinations. Basically, my argument was NPERS was implying a contract to work where one did not exist. And I have a contract and it says my contract will be over by such and such a date. I chose to work after that. Why? Because I had a contract for the following year. And so it just rolled. But at the time I retired, I didn't have a contract to work to August 31st, 2020. What could I have done to prevent this? Left school every day at 4 o'clock, right? How many ag teachers do that? Don't do anything in the summer. How many ag teachers do that? I could have, what really hit me is I had somebody, a friend of mine, who had a 5-day extended contract. And he said, okay, I've got this conference, that's 2 days. I've got this thing here, that's 3 days. I'm done. I never do more than that. I thought, what I did for my kids was not based on some day thing. It was based on what I thought was necessary to make a decent department for them, to give them some experiences. And, I was getting nicked for it. That's all I've got. Anybody else? Jason want to speak up? I am done.
Maybe it'd be good if anybody had questions at this point, from what you said.
Yeah, I do, I guess, because I'm I'm not that far behind you, Steve. And, I'm probably going to teach, I don't know yet, another year, possibly 2. But I'm a little lost on this whole duty log thing. The first time I even heard of doing duty logs was this year. Our secretary said, you'll have to do duty logs now. I've never had to turn in a duty log, but I've always had a summer contract, and I've always thought I was very fortunate. I've always had an 11.5 to a 12-month contract in the schools that I've been in. And I guess I'm a little lost. What kind of a problem? It sounds like that's a problem to have a summer contract.
Yeah, doesn't it? It does sound like a problem. And yet, where do you get you used to get a lot of your work done was in the summer.
Yeah, because for going on 32 years, I've only taken 2 weeks off every summer. And so I was under the assumption that the school reported all of this to NPERS. I thought that was part of the contract. Am I not understanding that correctly?
Well, I personally think you might be okay if you have not been reporting hours in the summer. I don't know. If they report them for you. In Ken's case, he said he had not reported any hours. He thought the school did that for him. I know our bookkeeper said she's never going to report summer hours again. Now, I don't think that's necessarily the way that NPERS wanted things to go. Yeah, you don't want to find out about this, like 5 months after you retire.
No,
Okay.
I appreciate you doing this, Steve, because I'm going to start asking some questions.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if I can, in the chat, attach some documents.
I'm not sure if UNL, which we're using UNL service,
Okay.
you might be able to.
Well,
I can. I don't know. Maybe I can make you the host, and maybe then you can.
okay.
Down in the chat, there's a little document icon just to the right of like where it says everyone. And you can choose your computer then. You see that, Jason?
Yeah, I see where it is. Okay, let me see if I can do this.
And I don't know if Jason's attaching this or not, but in the year 2020, a lot of people's graduations spilled into the summer. And I believe NPERS had something to say about that. I often wondered, okay, so I'm working in the summer, I'm turning in hours. What does full-time mean to someone down in Lincoln? How many hours do I have to put in? Quite obviously, that last June, I put in about 40 hours a week in that month of June. And so, yeah, that's full-time. And my understanding was if you helped for an hour at a graduation in the year 2020 and you were retiring that year, you could be in trouble. Like
Okay,
Jason
so
has some things.
I think I am ready to talk.
All right, they both came through.
Okay, so and I appreciate, I wanted to let everybody kind of talk before I jumped in. Let's go ahead. So what you were talking about was actually two different issues. And so, but I can see where you would see they were connected with regard to reporting of duty hours. So first, I want to kind of go back a little bit and talk a little bit more about what Steve was dealing with and really describe what the issue is. The issue is what's the day determination? And so if you can see on my screen, the definition, what the agency follows is the statute number is 79-902-45A. This is probably the only section of retirement law I cite because otherwise I have to look it up. But there's a lot of things that the definitions are in this section. So that's how I know it. But if you look at 45A, I underlined it. Termination of employment occurs on the date on which the member experiences a bona fide separation from service of employment with the member's employer, the date of which separation is determined by the end of the member's contractual agreement, or if there is no contract, or only partial fulfillment of the contract by the employer. And so this is a crucial thing for most employees. Their contract is going to specify when the last day that they have to report to school for the year is. That typically is going to be, maybe in the middle of May or the end of May. And then there's another section of the statute that says that if you retire, the first day of the next month following your termination is your retirement date. So for most people, you're going to retire, your last day working is going to be in May. You're going to retire with a June 1 retirement date, and you're going to get your benefit check for the month of June, and everything's happy. So the situation that Steve described is where you have a contract that specifies extra days during the summer, and that creates some complexity, right? So that kind of leaves the contract open-ended. It used to be in statute, and I don't know if that happened in 2012. I seem to recall that it happened back in the 2000s when this actual change was. But it used to be that your termination date was set by your employer. So your employer would say, regardless of what the contract said, your employer would say that your last date was May 25th. And NPERS just accepted that. Then there were some issues with some school districts, and people thought that people were taking advantage of that date and that they were being paid for 12 months of duty, let's say you're a school psychologist or you're an administrator, and your contract, you're really meant to be working till, let's say July 30th. Well, some school districts were just saying, well, you're quitting, you're retiring, we're going to let you, go away, end in May 15th. And some people felt like, hey, these are for the highly paid compensated employees, right? Some superintendents and whatnot. And so they went in and amended the statute to basically say it's the date of separation is determined by the contractual agreement. So, the thought was, let's focus in on those 10-month contract employees or annual employees, not just the typical teacher contract, which is, you work for 9 months, but you're paid over 12 months. And you retire in May, and everybody knows that. Occasionally you might have a snow day that makes your last day, June 2nd, and then you get a July 1 retirement date. But in Steve's situation, he had these 10 additional days. I think it was, when he first told me his situation, I thought, this is really crappy, because you're doing the right thing, Steve. It was COVID, things were kind of up in the air. You knew you were retiring. You were trying to get things ready for the next person coming in, kind of finishing up your responsibilities. There really was a question of, are you still the employee? You didn't, you weren't required to come in. You chose to come in. So I think there was a real gray area in terms of when your last day was at this point. Now, the emperor's attorney, tended to look at it, and he's a nice person. Attorneys kind of see things, black and white sometimes, and his determination was that, and I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but until they took the keys away from you, you were still an employee. Yeah. And typically you might have the keys, but if you have your employer call you up and tell you to come in, and you're under threat of being terminated, then yeah, I would say you're still an employee. If you have a former employer call you up and say, hey, I need you to come in, and you say no, and there's really no threat to your job because you're no longer an employee, then you're not an employee. And so that's where the real gray area is on this. But I want to make sure that everybody's a section of statute, so that you could kind of decide what, if you had any kind of gray areas yourself of ways to get around it, and to make sure that it was very clear. Now, my advice to people in the past has been that if you're going to retire, that you make sure that you have a contract or an addendum to your contract that says when your last date of work is, and make it very clear. Make sure that you don't have any kind of open-ended, the worst thing would be is you retire in May and you find out that you actually had a contract that said the last day of this contract is August 30th or August 31st. And now that's really problematic for you. So, getting an addendum to your contract may mean that you have to go through your board to make sure that it's specified what that addendum is. That addendum saying that this contract ends on, let's say, May 25th, and that is your last day of work. So, that's probably, making sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and that's probably, more than what most people have to do. But that's one issue. Another issue is that, hold on just a second. I've got my daughter coming in. She just got home. I've got a 2-year-old. I'm just going to sit her up here with me. So, yeah, she loves retirement law. So the other issue is just that I think you want to be more increasingly aware of, and this was that second issue that I talked about, is the reporting of extra duty hours. MPERS is kind of in just in the last 12 months taken a harder line. And I'm going to switch over into a different screen here. And this is the other document that I attached. This is the mandatory reporting of extra duty. This document, your office manager or somebody at your district office, I'm sure, is aware of. They're just, what they're wanting to do now is to make sure that if you work an hour in a certain month, they want to make sure that that hour is reported to MPERS. And so that's probably why you're being asked to report your extra duty hours now, whereas in the past, maybe you didn't have to do it, or it was just kind of on your own. I mean, just as a general rule of thumb, it's good to make sure that you're keeping track of the hours that you work so nobody can come back later and question it. But I would say that when you actually have retired and terminated, it's very important that you make sure that you establish a bona fide break in service, because you don't want to be in that situation where you quit and then you've got your principal or somebody at the school saying, hey, we really need you to come in and maybe help out at this graduation ceremony, or we've got this event and we need to we'll pay you for it, because those things would negate your bona fide break in service. And fortunately, we were able to get some changes in statute just this past session in 2021, which say now that, and I'm sure you're aware of that, once you terminate, you're supposed to, you have to have a 180-day break in service, a 6-month break in service before you can be on full-time staff again. The law has always been, or previously was, that you could provide substitute service. You could volunteer on an intermittent basis during that 180-day break in service. But nobody really knew what intermittent meant. Was that 1 day a week or 2 days a week, or what did that mean? And we've had situations where somebody provided intermittent service and MPERS started tracking their hours and found out that felt like they were full-time and actually withheld their retirement benefit for 3 months. And so you want to be very careful on this. But what we're able to get in statute now, and I'm going to go back to that other screen now. I can. And that is in this part now, this B1, which says that if you work, or that you can work 8 days of service or provide 8 days of service during a calendar month and still have a bona fide separation. Now, I want to preface that by saying if you work 10 minutes on a day, that's counted as a full day of service, right? So you can't say, hey, I only worked 8 hours. I didn't provide, I provided eight hours of time over a 9-day period. They'll treat that as you working 9 days. So, but I hope I haven't left anything out. I've kind of thrown up a couple of different issues up there. The main rule of thumb is make sure that your termination date is very clear, and that is what your last day of your contract is. And if you feel like your contract doesn't spell it out very, very clearly, certainly talk to your field rep, your NSCA person to help you on that. And if you need to, work on getting an addendum or something clear in writing that they can attach to that contract that says what your last day of work is, and that ends your duties under your contract. I think just is, as I mentioned, I'd like to see all school districts have kind of this form ready to go to provide to their members that give notice of retirement, so that there aren't any issues with this. But then even when you have retired, and even when you have that final contract date and everything's very clear and there's no issues, be careful that you don't come back and provide additional service beyond that 8 days of substitute service. And you want to make sure that the district, knows that you are a substitute or that you're a volunteer, and that you're not doing this under your former contract. So any questions from what I've talked about? A lot of information. So, but hopefully I've given you some additional reading material that if you need more questions, and you know, certainly I know we've said some things about MPERS, but you know, they are there to help you. You know, they're in an odd situation sometimes because they get pressure from the auditor's office to make sure that they're following state law correctly. They want to do the right thing, you know, but unfortunately there are gray areas where that leads itself to different interpretations. And fortunately, in the situation of Steve, you know, the hearing officer, you know, was sympathetic to the evidence that he presented and recommended that benefit be changed. So
I guess the question that I have is, maybe you've answered already, is that teachers like Randy could go to their NSCA rep for help on this.
that's true.
Jason, oh, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I don't know. I kind of connected to that. Is that notice of your final day of service, that where that's documented with your school? Is that only important then in your final year, that you need to get ahead of that thing? And
Yeah.
what's the right time of year in the school year? Is it the spring semester prior to your final year teaching?
You know, I guess if it was me, it might specify in your contract when you're supposed to give notice, but you know, for me, I think that I would make sure that I had those things wrapped up the fall before the spring that I was going to retire. I mean, I guess there are always going to be situations where somebody gets to February and they're like, you know, maybe I just need to retire for health reasons or other reasons. But if you know ahead of time, you know, that this is going to be your last year, and you think that's, you know, hopefully your district has policies on that when to give notice and whatnot. But, you know, just what's problematic is that many times you've just got a continuing contract. You get a letter in the mail that that's your contract, or so those are good questions just to ask your NSCA representative in terms of, you know, hey, I'm thinking about retiring in 2 years. I want to make sure that I've got that I know when the end of my contract is. NSCA I think it started last year, maybe 2 years ago. You know, things kind of blend together with the pandemic. I kind of forget which year things happened and whatnot. But for the past couple of years, they've been providing some retirement seminars on their own, in addition to what MPERS does to try to answer some of these other questions. So.
Great. Dave, I see that you unmuted. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I got my school contract out in here and it says, and so it has my extended contract on there, so 220 days. And then it says, and has a start date of July 23rd and then ends on or about June 18th. Is that good enough for?
Yeah, so I would just say in that situation that you would have typically a termination date of June 18th and a retirement start date of July 1st.
Okay.
So if you left work on a Monday, or I'm sorry, if you left work, I mean, if you quit or wanted to retire in May, and then all of a sudden wondered, you know, where was your June retirement check, that might be an issue.
Yeah.
In that situation, you may want to work with your district to get clarification that your contract ends in May because you're retiring in May.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no, good question.
I have all of my contracts, folks. The one I'm looking at now says end on or about May 20th, 2020. All of my contracts had corresponding dates like that. So even though I had the language in the contract, in date in the contract, they used the information from my logs of my summer work to imply that I was a year-round employee.
And that's the tough thing, because you've got the benefit, I'm trying to think of their exact titles, but let's just call them benefit calculators. The people who figure up what your final thing is, they'll look at a spreadsheet that has the last 3 years of your contributions, or for some of the newer employees, maybe 5 years of your contributions. And so, in their first thought, they see that money's coming in 10 months of the year, or I mean, it really should be 12 months of the year, because most people are getting paid a check each month. But they'll see that extra duty coming in the summer, and they'll immediately think, oh, well, this must be a 10-month contract employee. Why are they retiring in May? They should be retiring in June. And so I think, this was some of the reasons why, Steve, you were successful, because you did have that document. You did have a contract that made clear what the end date was. Although I think what Orrin was trying to say, or the legal counsel there was trying to say, was, well, yes, but you also had an additional contract, or there was other evidence to suggest that you were a summer employment, an employee or whatnot. I think getting something in writing, an addendum to your contract, just something that specifies my last day of work will be this. And it's just unfortunate, because again, Steve, you did the right thing by coming in and making sure everything was being taken care of. And that's, and ultimately you prevailed because of it, but it certainly was a process through to that point.
But in my case, it was not just that last June. It was the records since 2012 that were being brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't, and my superintendent got on that several times. Well, he said, you should have not just worked in that last June. I said, it's not just last June. It's the last 8 years that they're talking about. And can you answer that question that I brought up while we were busy making attachments? What was NPER's attitude towards people helping during summer graduations in 2020? How'd that affect retirements?
Yeah, so we got some guidance from NPERS during the pandemic that because the school year was being extended in some cases, or schools were choosing to delay their graduation ceremonies until, instead of May, they put them off till July or early August, because when things started getting a little bit better pandemic wise. NPERS was letting everybody know that if you come in and you work, that that may be considered that you're still working under your original contract, and therefore you wouldn't be having a bona fide break in service, and you may jeopardize your retirement payment. So there, two things is like, you might be thinking, well, hey, Jason, didn't you just say you could come in intermittently? Well, yes, but you have to come in intermittently under some different agreement, whether that be providing substitute service. If you're coming back in, as an employee, then they're going to use that as evidence that you've been an employee the whole time. And so, again, another really crappy result, because given the situation with COVID, I mean, there were teachers that weren't able to go to the graduation ceremony of their students and help out and be part of that, maybe be on stage or be part of the, their last graduation ceremony, because they were concerned about losing their retirement benefit. And this has been a real tough area of law, because prior to having that 8-day allowance, if you want to call it that, you could come in and volunteer. You could read a book to kindergartners and be accused of providing service and not having a bona fide break in service. So, and that's just not the cruelty of MPERS. Remember, the reason the statutes are written a certain way is because of guidance that the legislature and that the agencies receive from the Internal Revenue Service. So, if you want to point fingers, it ultimately goes to Congress. And the reason that, MPERS has these rules and regulations that may seem harsh are because they don't want to run afoul of IRS of guidance and of federal law. So, so be aware of that too. And if you do have an issue with MPERS, realize they're just trying to do the best job they can, and they're in a tough situation as well.
Thanks, Jason. There are a couple of questions in the chat. I think I know the answers, so I'm going to try to answer these, Jason. You just give me a thumbs up or correct me. Tony asks if we want to ask our school, the bookkeeper superintendent about this, like what's the best way to word it, go about it, or is the NSEA rep rather than the bookkeeper superintendent the best place to start? I think I heard you say the NSEA rep will be able to help you navigate that, or. I'm
trying to think of, if I was the employee, what I would do. I would go and talk to my bookkeeper first. And, just internally, if I had an issue then internally, and if I didn't feel like I was getting help or the appropriate assistance, then I would, certainly go to my NSEA rep. That's not to say, I guess if you think that there's going to be a problem going to your bookkeeper or superintendent, then yeah, definitely go to your NSEA rep first. But I certainly don't want you to give the impression that, most of these things, most of the time working with your bookkeeper, talking about, wanting to make sure that I know when I'm going to be terminated. They go through seminars. They get information from MPERS. They're there to assist you as well. So I don't want to cut them out of that loop. Okay, that's helpful. Thanks. Kurt asks if our last day is August 31st, shouldn't we expect to start receiving payments in September? I think he's using that as an example. If our last day is the last day of the month, the first day of the next month, even if it is the 31st. Okay, so here's an interesting thing is that, yes, if your last day is August 31st, your retirement start date would be September 1, and you would receive a benefit check for the month of September. Now, remember, there's always a delay from when MPERS first provides you that check. I think they have up to 90 days, or maybe it might be 120, but to me, it always seemed like a long period of time before they have to provide you your first benefit payment. One of the reasons is this: sometimes there's a delay in reporting hours from the school district. There's a delay in getting contributions from the school district to MPERS. They have to go through the calculations to make sure that everything, before they type in that benefit amount or press that button, they want to make sure that they have all the documentation from the school district. So that's the reason why you're never going to retire. Your last day is not going to be August 31st, and you're not going to get a check, 5 days later for your first benefit payment. But they will pay those retroactively back to September 1st. But it's always good to make sure that you've got, some financial resources in case there's a delay of a couple of months. And in Steve's situation, when there is an issue with your benefit, if it's lower than what you expected, that you're not caught off guard, to have a little bit of cushion before you retire and realize, if that's maybe 1 month of income set aside, that might be helpful. I know that might seem overwhelming, just, because that's, that is a chunk of money for just 1 month of income, but hopefully, that gets you through kind of a period of time. Thanks. Here's a thought I had. I, again, with the university, Jason, and so I work with a lot with our pre-service teachers and that. But as I worked with teachers and schools and administrators at times,
when they talk about extended contract, different from the FFA extra duty pay, the extended contract, that the way that I like to think of it is those are days that are non-school days where you're doing work on behalf of the school. And ag teachers do a lot of that. For instance, state fair always happens over Labor Day weekend, and ag teachers always work on Labor Day. That's a non-contract and non-school day. And and so I encourage teachers to check with their admin and to advocate for the days like that during the school year can count toward extended contract days. And so I don't know if that's useful or not for some people, but those extended contract days don't always have to be after the school year ends. But you want to make sure you know what your admin thinks that those are too, so you can have a conversation in advance.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, and just make sure that there's something in writing between you and your district that extended contract has severed, prior to or on or before that termination date.
That's good. Thanks. I know we've been on this call for a while, and I really appreciate everyone sticking on, and especially Steve and Jason for their help. What last questions might anyone have?
I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say thanks to both Steve and Jason, Matt, for you putting this on, because it's certainly given me a lot to think about over the course of this next year and what I need to be checking on. So I appreciate it very much.
Sounds like Randy might have a to-do list to be thinking about. Dave, you're the most immediate person to retire too at the end of this semester. So you probably plan on having a conversation and checking a couple of things off your list. But
Yep, I do. So,
well, last call on any last questions or comments from teachers or from Jason and Steve.
I'd like to end once again thanking Matt and Jason for everything, and echoing what Jason said about NPERS. They're good people. They're doing the best they can. I told Diane, I said, well, I could about imagine they got these logs in down there. They go, what idiot would work in this summer that much for nothing? My wife's been saying that for years, but he has to be getting paid, obviously. There's some things that came out during the hearing that we're not going to cover today that might be useful to you, but I know they're going to come up with documentation. I'll put it this way, documentation through emails. You need to be able to answer with documentation of your own. And I was lucky that I had people at Osceola who could do that. I actually had a school board president and I used his comments against the comments that they got from the bookkeeper. And the extra duty log that they depended on so desperately, I was able to take that apart and show them, okay, I had my extra duty done by November, most years. So something what Matt was saying about doing extra duty during the year. So I was able to, it took a long time to do this. I hope none of you have to go through it. But the younger teachers, I think, you need to be thinking ahead a little bit.
I would just add to that, know when your bona fide break in service is, know when that termination date is, and then just, stay away. Stay away and make sure that, your actions, adhere to that bona fide break in service. And the situation that I explained earlier, where that person lost 3 months of their benefit, it was because their school district kept calling them in and saying, hey, we need you to come in. We need you to help out. And he was under the impression that, well, if there was a problem, the school district wouldn't be calling him. And the issue was, it wasn't up to the school district to keep track of if they were in compliance. The person that was going to be penalized was him for not getting his benefit. So don't just, I don't think they were trying to trick him or harm him in any way, but they just, the employee is the one that's responsible for knowing if they're in that 6-month period following their termination. Nobody's going to look out for you. So you got to keep track of it yourself and make sure that,
that's useful. Yeah. Thanks, Jason. And thank you, Steve. I know people always ask, oh, what are you going to do in retirement? And yeah, I don't think Steve was probably telling people become an expert in how to fight for my retirement benefit, but you seem to be one now. And hopefully, even though it was painful to go through, Steve, hopefully you're sharing your experience with us, and Jason, you sharing your expertise with us will save some other people some heartache down the road. And so we do appreciate that.
I want to say one other thing that just popped into my head, and that, and this isn't just a pitch, but it's, you know, I certainly appreciate you being members of NSCA. Be aware of that, that in order to have some of the services provided to you as a retired member, that you actually have to join NSCA Retireds. To, if you have an issue down the road with a benefit, that you're a member of NSCA Retired. So there's been a couple of situations where somebody was an NSCA member for a number of years, and then they're like, I'm retiring, I'm not going to be part of NSCA anymore. They didn't join NSCA Retired. If it happens right at the time of the break in service, I think you'd still have the service. But 6 months go by, a year go by, and then you're trying to go back and do something. I know that's been an issue with some because they didn't sign up for NSCA Retired. So just be aware of that. I'd hate to see anybody in that situation.
I didn't know that was a thing. That's really good information to know. So yeah. Well, this is a great demonstration of the value that NSCA brings to teachers. And thanks, Jason, so much for spending your time.
Thank you. I'll be sending out capital updates over this legislative session. So typically, if you have a retirement question, they'll probably direct you to somebody else. That's only because during the legislative session, I'm focused on everything that's school related and what's going on with the legislature. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Steve. And thank you everyone for being on the call. We appreciate your time. And again, hopefully this has been useful, and we thank you very much. So have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.